Hey everyone, my name is Adi, and today we will go over the materials you need when using watercolor. I plan to make the next tutorials about watercolors, and I am very excited about this. Because watercolor is a very versatile medium and very fun in my opinion. I will add a list of the materials in the description below the video so you can focus on the explanations. First of all, watercolor paints. Watercolors come both in tubes and pens. When using pens, add water to activate them. Use a clean brush so they will not get dirty with another color, though you can remove the dirty part with a brush. They are comfortable for traveling, but when closing the box they may get stuck to the upper part. The paint works like glue, so it will be hard to get them out. So I use a Velcro that comes in a tape to keep them in place. When using tubes, they are more vivid because they are more concentrated. You will need a bit more water to make them transparent. Make sure to close them properly so they will not dry inside the tube. And try not to squeeze them too hard to avoid getting too much of the color out. You can buy pens and tubes in sets, but also individually. Both have the same quality. It comes down to your own preference which one to use. If you are not sure, you can even buy few individual paints of each type. You can use both tubes and pens in the same artwork and even mix them together. Don't buy anything that looks like it has a target audience of kids. Good watercolors allow you to have a wide range between transparency and how saturated they can be. So if you see that you need to go over the same place with many layers in order to get it vivid and dark, then it can get in your way. It means that you should probably buy new watercolors. You also need a palette to mix colors with water or with one another. When placing colors on the palette, try to organize them in a way that makes sense to you. Don't place colors on a palette that is too dirty, in order to avoid muddy colors. You can easily clean it with water and towel paper. Some watercolor packs come with a small palette, but I prefer to work on a wider palette because there is more space. You don't have to buy one too, but it is cheap and light-weighted. Palettes that you buy in store usually have sockets where you can put watercolor, tubes or gouache. Let's talk about brushes. I only use brushes that are soft. Brushes come in different shapes and sizes. Wide brushes can cover a lot of space and are good for wetting your paper with water for wet-to-wet technique. Square brushes can be good for creating lines when you hold them 90 degrees to the paper, and also to create elements like bricks. Fan brush can be good to create elements like vegetation. Small brushes are good for details. I use pointy brushes most of the time, but I think it's good to have a variety of brushes to give you more options, because sometimes you don't know what you will need. When painting in watercolors, always use the bigger brush that you can and switch to smaller brushes when you need to. There are many companies that create brushes. It really depends on your own preference which one to use. Some use real animal hair, while some are synthetic. Another difference can be the length of the handle or the hair. Don't use brushes that have hair loss. It can be really annoying to pick the hair while painting. Take good care of your brushes. Clean them properly when you're done painting. Once in a while, wash them with soap, shampoo, and conditioner. If you take good care of your brushes, they will last for a long time. When painting, I sometimes use one brush for each color. It saves time because you don't have to constantly clean the same brush and you waste less color. One last thing. If you use both watercolors and oil colors, then you should have a different set for each media. Even if you clean the brushes well, some of the materials you use with oil colors can still left inside the brush and could interfere when painting in watercolor. So don't use brushes that you already used for oil colors to paint with watercolors. You will also need a brush storage so that you can store your brushes in a way that keeps them protected. Masking tape so that your paper will stay in place. It also creates a white frame effect. It can be used to keep away color from an area in your painting. In other words, to keep an area white. Use a masking tape that doesn't rip your paper. White gouache or white acrylic or white pen. Because watercolor are not opaque, you can't go over dark areas with white watercolor. So you will need to keep the white of the paper, and for small details you can use white of another media. Masking fluid and skewers. Masking fluid is great for keeping areas white. After it dried, you can go over it with colors. After what you painted is done and dry, you can just pull it off. I use skewer to apply the masking fluid. Brush will get destroyed. And when using skewer, it is easy to remove the extras of masking fluid after it dried. I recommend attaching your paper to a board, even if you work on a table, so that you will be able to move it around if you wish. Like in cases when the paper is wet and you want the watercolor to flow from one area to another. I sometimes paint on an easel when painting in watercolor. I have a folding easel so that I can paint outdoors as well. Moving on with our list. Cloth rag to wipe off the brushes. Paper towel to absorb extra water if you have too much water on your painting. Water spray. This is optional. You can just use a brush to drop water on the colors. But I think it's worth it because it's comfortable to wet your colors or even your painting. Permanent pens or waterproof pens. These two names describe the same thing. Pens that doesn't melt if you apply water on it. Often used in watercolor painting. You can draw with it before you add the watercolor or after. If you are not happy with your artwork, sometimes just by adding a contour with pen it can bring everything together. Aside from pen, there are more kinds of media that people use with watercolor. Watercolor or aquarelle pencils. I usually use H drawing pencil to create a plan before adding the watercolor so that the lines will not be visible. You can also use watercolors pencils. When you go over them, they will blend in with the rest of the painting. Colored pencils. in general can be used to add details on top of the watercolor layers. Watercolor can be hard to control, especially for beginners, so you can use colored pencils if you want to add accurate details. Sponge can be used as an art tool to apply color to your painting. Table salt and cooking salt can be added on your painting while it's still wet. You remove it after it dried. It creates a special effect. Pens that aren't waterproof. They melt when you use water on them, but they will not dissolve completely, which creates a unique effect. Once the water dried on the paper, they will stay in the same way. They only melt one time. We did mention gouache before. Gouache has similar properties to watercolor, so they can work well in the same painting. Gouache is more opaque, so they can be added in areas that you want a more vibrant color or over a dark layer of color. Last but not least, watercolor paper 300 grams. There are different types of watercolor papers and some that claim to be watercolor papers. Watercolor paper needs to be thick enough so when you use water and layers of paint it will be able to hold up. The thickness of the paper is marked by its weight. 300 grams is what you need. If for some reason you use a paper less than 300 grams, use a little water and a few layers as you can. You don't have to buy the most expensive paper right away, but don't buy the cheapest ones that are not suitable either. It will not only affect the result, but also you won't have a chance to study watercolor properly and feel how they behave. There are different types of paper: hot pressed, cold pressed, and rough paper. They got their names due to how they are made. The main difference between them is the texture. Hot pressed is the most smooth. Cold pressed has little bumps, and rough paper has the most texture. It depends on your personal preference and techniques that you are using which one to use. The type of paper can also affect how much time it takes to dry or how the colors will look like. I think that as part of the learning process, it's good to try different papers. I like to have different options and to match the paper to what I want to paint and the techniques that I will use. For example, if you want to use a dry brush, a technique that keeps the spaces between the bumps white, then you need to use a rough paper or cold pressed paper. So that's it. You don't have to buy everything on this list, especially not right away. The next videos will be watercolor tutorials, and we will use different techniques and materials. Make sure to subscribe to my channel if you haven't done so already, so that you will not miss anything. Thank you so much for watching. See you soon. Bye bye.